Hi everyone! Welcome to episode 21 of Japan Foundation's Pop Culture Series. I'm Sokia Mio from Japan Foundation's New York office, here with my arts and culture team. In this episode, we will explore the educational power of anime and manga. Our main focus is to delve into how manga and anime can be powerful tools to inspire kids' passion for learning, foster a sense of community, and help them form their own identities. Today, we've invited 4 experts who will talk about a profound impact of manga and anime on learning with real-world examples from both the US and Japan. Our first speaker is Dr. Michael Bitz, a professor at the Ramapo College in New Jersey. He specializes in how manga creation nurtures personal creativity and growth among young learners. In his short presentation, he will share an example from his experience with a high school comic book club in New York City. Our second speaker is Dr. Brian Wilson, a professor emeritus in the School of Visual Arts at Penn State. Hi! His research focus includes the influence of visual culture on children's artistic development. While Dr. Bitz will present an example from the US, Dr. Wilson will talk about how manga has shaped the children's development in Japan. Our third speaker is Emily Wagner, the Director of Student Transitions at the University of Colorado, Denver. She is also a teacher for the first-year experience program, which includes a class she created called Anime Goes to College. In her short presentation, she will talk about how anime can be used to engage students in their studies, reduce dropout rates, and foster a sense of community and belonging on college campuses. Finally, our moderator is Dr. Masami Toku, a professor of art education at California State University, Chico. Hi. She specializes in cross-cultural studies of children's artistic and authentic development and how visual pop culture influences children's visual literacy. We will begin with short pre-recorded presentations from each guest speaker. Afterward, they will join a live discussion based on questions we've received in advance. If you have any questions or comments during the event, feel free to post them in a live chat, and we will try to answer as many as possible. Now let's move on to the presentation, starting with Michael. I will return later for the Q&A session. See you then! Pochi.
Hello, my name is Michael Bitz, and it is a pleasure today to speak with you about manga and my experiences with manga through the lens of high schoolers in New York City. I wrote about this in my 2009 book, Manga High, which is featured here on this slide. I would like to say that all the images that we'll see in this presentation are used with the permission of the authors and artists who created them. So I have 25 years experience in helping young people all over the world to write, design, and publish original comic books. It's a program called the Comic Book Project, and we help young people to tell their stories, share those stories with their communities, and enter the world of authorship by writing and designing and then publishing these original works of art and literature. My first experience with a high school group was also my first experience with manga. And in the mid-2000s and 2010s, I worked with a series of youth at Martin Luther King High School. And I pointed out on this satellite map, because it's important to know a little bit about Martin Luther King High School. It's located right in the heart of Lincoln Center, which is where famous musicians and orchestras perform at the Met and the City Ballet and so on. And it's also right across the street from a very famous high school called LaGuardia High School. And LaGuardia High School of Music and Art has graduated many famous actors and performers and musicians. And so Martin Luther King High School really lived in the shadow of this neighborhood that it didn't really fit into so well. Martin Luther King High School didn't really have very good test results. It was rife with violent acts, bad relations between teachers and students, and overall it was considered one of the most troubled high schools in New York City, to the point where New York City eventually broke up Martin Luther King High School into 6 different high schools living in the same building. But when I entered the school, through the metal detector, it was Martin Luther King High School. And I entered to work with my first group of high schoolers, and it turned out to be my first experience with manga. These are some of the images that I saw in the student sketchbooks. I'll let you enjoy a few of these as they go by. And it was only in working with these young people over several years and learning about their true dedication to Japanese art and writing and culture that I came to appreciate what manga was all about and how important it was in the lives of these high schoolers. And I think that their dedication to manga really says a lot about the power of art and literature and creativity because it breaks stereotypes. I never really would have expected that high schoolers in New York City would be so connected to Japan to the point of giving themselves Japanese nicknames and studying Japanese language and learning as much as they could about Japanese culture. And of course, creating their own versions of manga through their sketchbooks and through my work in helping to publish and present their comic books at community events and through grant-funded publications. And I felt very privileged to be entering their world and to enter their world as a student of manga because they really schooled me and they taught me what manga was all about. And I learned from them not only about manga, but also about who these people were and why this kind of art and literature was so important to them. And so in talking with the students, I learned, that this girl on the left had type 2 diabetes and struggled with insulin injections several times a day. And so this creation of hers really represents what she was going through. And while on the surface, maybe the design wouldn't seem to represent the girl who created it, in actuality, it really does, because it came from her. It represents her identity of who she's saying who she is. And that's how important and why this is so important in these young people's lives. Here's a girl named Samantha who created a likeness of herself in her sketchbook. And she really wasn't very supportive of herself. She's calling herself a few crayons short of a box and not the brightest bulb in a chandelier. Samantha, like many of the other students in this club, were struggling in high school. They were not doing well in their English or their art classes. And their teachers just simply could not build a bridge to their love of manga and what manga represented to them. And so all of this work that we're seeing is taking place in an after-school setting where the youth would put aside all their troubles and all the things that they were going through and just focus on creating manga with each other in a very dedicated situation and setting. And they became so connected to Japanese language and culture to the point where many of them wanted to try to move to Japan if that was at all possible for them, or to maybe have a Japanese exchange program. They loved Japanese language. They loved Japanese culture. They were learning about Japanese food and the different cities, all through the different manga that they were reading and then creating. And so I wanted to find out more from them. Why manga? Why does this speak so much to you, and why does it connect you so much to these other youth in your high school? And I uncovered a few themes in my extensive interviews and observations of the group, which mostly meant hanging out with them while they were having their manga club after school. One was this really a special lack of superheroes in the manga that they were reading and creating. And this one girl was telling me why she didn't like Superman or Spider-Man or any of the American comics superheroes. She says, so this guy's bolting down the street right towards you. He's wearing these blue tights and a red cape, and he's bulging all over. It's like a real New York scene that could be happening. And I'd be like, call the cops, get this wacko away from me. Superman is so silly. She really did not connect at all with the American style or American theme comics. And her and the other members of the group were creating manga that really did not represent superheroes or action. Here's a girl who finds a cat and decides to name it Pebbles, and Pebbles grumbles in the last panel. You can see a wide range of approaches to creating manga, this one using some technology in the use of Photoshop after scanning in hand-drawn art. This one back to sketchbook style, but really great design with the little watermelon slices falling in the background. And how do they make toothpicks? It's so different from the comics that I had seen from other youths and other schools, and also from the comics I was familiar with. Here's a full page scene from one of the girls. You can see how her face explodes when she meets the really cute guy that she has a crush on. I think is really well done, really well crafted, and really indicative of how dedicated the young people were to manga. Another reason why manga was so important to the youth at Martin Luther King High School was their opportunity to collaborate, to not be a silo, sitting alone, reading manga on your own, but to connect with others and collaborate on works of manga by perhaps sharing the writing responsibilities or the inking responsibilities or whatever it may have been, to come together, create stories together, reflect on stories together, of course, talk about the manga they loved and the manga that they didn't like, and to essentially form a community around manga. Here they are, much to the ire of the Barnes & Noble store manager, spread across the floor, pulling books off the shelves, and just having a great time forming a literary community that is kind of like a salon in the sense that it is full of laughter, full of joy, full of exploration of literature and art, and an opportunity for the young people to bond and come together over this incredible art and writing. Also, they love manga because it gave them an opportunity to publish and self-publish in the Japanese vein of doujinshi, to be able to share your work with others and show it off and celebrate it and be celebrated as an author and an artist. Here are some of the covers that were created over the years through Martin Luther King High School. This is one of the last pictures we took. I was able to establish a celebration for the club at Teachers College at Columbia University, where the project was first hosted when I was a senior research associate at the college. And it was a great opportunity for professors and graduate students and community members to come to the college and hear these experts talk about manga, showcase their manga, and celebrate their work. So in conclusion, I'd like to just share some of the things that I learned, and I learned so much because I was certainly a student of these manga creators as well. First off, young people have such a diverse range of interests, and many of those interests challenge stereotypes. We can't assume what a young person is into or how they identify until we talk with them and share their interest and share their passions and try to understand where they're coming from and build bridges. And speaking of those bridges, in the classroom, it's somewhat shocking to me that so many of these students were struggling in school during the day and then being so adept at reading, writing, listening, and speaking after school. There's a gap that needs to be filled, and we at least need to meet the youth halfway because their interest in art and literature is there. We just need to help them understand how it connects to everything else that we want them to do in the classroom. And finally, creative activities like a manga club can be so instrumental in changing a life. I know that it changed my life in experiencing the manga club with these youth. but also in their personal lives, it became a safety net and a support network for them as they formed a collaboration of peers and caring adults around them to try to get them through difficult times in their life, things ranging from homelessness to failing out of school and so on. The Manga Club was a lifeline, and I was really fortunate and happy to be a part of that experience. Just would like to thank the Japan Foundation for having me and supporting this effort and this presentation and the event as a whole, and also to my colleagues for their wonderful contributions to the world of manga and education. Thank you so much.
So, how an American researcher discovered the educational power of doujinshi manga, or how Japanese children teach themselves about themselves, endless worlds, the future, what's good and what's bad. In the early 1970s, I began to study children's drawings in their notebooks and sketchbooks, drawings that they made to please themselves. Kelly created an entire medieval world in her drawings. Anthony drew superheroes, thousands of them, and all sorts of actions from all different points of view. When I talked with Anthony, he could tell me stories that were happening, but without frames, only Anthony knew what was happening. J.C. Holtz created a stack of comic books about Birdman and Brenda, Rex, characters he had created. Some children, like J.C., drew their stories in frames. What if I asked lots of kids to draw stories in frames? What would their visual stories be like? I printed 6 frames and asked children to create a character to show what happens next, and how things turn out. I collected story drawings first in the United States and then in Europe. In the early 1980s, I asked a Penn State graduate student to collect 6-frame story drawings from Japan. The Japanese stories were populated by characters unlike any that the American children drew. They must have come from popular visual culture. I asked the student to send some Japanese comic books. This was my introduction to manga, and I knew that I must go to Japan and collect more children's story drawings. In 1989, I traveled from the bottom of Kyushu through Honshu to the top of Hokkaido, collecting over 1,000 children's 6-frame story drawings. Even in small Hokkaido mountain villages, children drew manga-influenced characters. I concluded that the characters children borrowed from manga taught them how to be Japanese. Each character had the potential to experiment with alternative selves. This character was drawn by a 5-year-old. Notice the heart-shaped face, the razor-cut hair, and the highlights in her large eyes. More than half of Japanese kindergarten children drew manga-influenced characters, and over 2/3 of children in grades 2, 4, and 6 drew characters influenced by manga. When in 1989 I asked an Osaka high school art teacher to have his students draw 6-frame story drawings, he said, well, I'll have them do it at home because manga is not a part of the national curriculum. This story was drawn at home. In the story, it shows high school students. They were given the assignment to create a planet in a box. One student was reluctant to show her drawing. Why? It was a failure. What was the planet's name? It was called Earth. Wow, profound, I thought. I compared the story drawings of Egyptian and Japanese children. Fewer than half of the Egyptian children were even able to draw a sequential story, and they usually depicted events from everyday life. Japanese children's story drawings were sequential, about overcoming difficulties, about success and failure, about solving problems, about what might happen in the future, about crime and punishment, about good and bad behavior. In 1989, in Sapporo, An elementary school headmaster showed me the manga-like publications made by students in an after-school program. Bon Voyage, volume 27, was printed on the school's mimeograph machine. The students' characters, to me, looked as if they were drawn by professional artists. This was my introduction to doujinshi manga-like publications made by groups of children and teenagers. You need to look at these. My research assistant, who was helping me to analyze the Japanese six-frame story drawings, returned from Japan handing me Tin Stone and a few other doujinshi manga, along with a catalog from a small comic market. She told me that there were lots of comic markets where Japanese teenagers sold their doujinshi. The term doujinshi, of course, refers to comics made and published by groups or circles, usually teenagers who organize themselves. When I saw the elegant drawings and read some of the doujinshi stories by teenagers working outside of school without the assistance or necessarily the encouragement of adults, I knew that I had to go to Japan again, this time to study doujinshi and comic markets, and I knew that I couldn't do it alone. Dr. Masami Toku and I made a plan to visit the summer 2000 comic market called Comiket at Big Sight in Tokyo. Comiket is the largest of hundreds of comic markets held throughout Japan and other Asian countries. Dr. Toku and I interviewed Yonizawa, who organized the first comic market in December of 1975. He wanted to provide a venue for teens to show and sell their doujinshi. 32 groups sold their publications to 700 attendees. By the time that Dr. Toku and I attended Comiket in 2000, 35,000 groups showed and sold their publications to 430,000 attendees. In 2008, the Comiket catalog is a 1,400-page marvel. Each of the 35,000 doujinshi groups is given a postage stamp-sized space to show their work. Fans know what they are looking for. The images tell them which of the 35,000 tables to visit. It's impossible to capture the excitement of fans searching for and finding doujinshi. In 2019, before COVID, 750,000 doujinshi fans visited Comiket. At the last Comiket in 2024, there were 29,000 doujinshi groups and 300,000 fans. There is nothing quite like sharing one's just-purchased doujinshi and reading with fellow fans. Post-COVID comic market attendance is declining, but fans can find an almost unlimited supply of doujinshi to read and purchase online. I studied how doujinshi groups functioned in Taiwan. What did I discover from a group called Secret Society? The teenagers formed themselves into the groups with no adult assistance. They selected their theme, Harry Potter. All of the members were writers and artists. They drew and wrote their own stories, and they selected one of their members to be the editor. They critiqued one another's visual stories to maintain quality, and they learned how to run a publishing business. What did the Secret Society members learn? What did they teach themselves? Through their Harry Potter stories, they explored the myriad ways to be a self. They experimented with the selves they might become. Through Hogwarts Formosa, they explored the realities of schooling and education. They confronted good and evil. They experimented with the future, with the lives they might make for themselves. Here are some of my insights from my study of doujinshi and comic markets. Comic markets encourage teenagers throughout Japan to become artists and writers and publishers of doujinshi. So what? The question I asked then is still important. Does being a doujinshi artist writer make a child smarter? And if so, are more Japanese children smarter than children in other countries? Perhaps yes. Doujinshi culture is more pervasive in Japan. Greater numbers of Japanese children and teenagers are actively shaping a powerful educational visual culture. In greater numbers than in other countries, Japanese children educate themselves. They shape and reshape themselves, imagine worlds past, present, and future. They shape the future by exploring the challenges and consequences of living in their present-day worlds.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Wagner, and today I'm going to talk to you about using anime as a tool to talk about various academic topics. So whether you are an educator or you're a student, particularly if you're a college student, or you're just curious about how you can tie academia with anime, this presentation is for you. So to start us off, I'm going to talk a little bit about belonging and identity in college. My research mainly is grounded in college student development theory. I'm going to cover very, very briefly a couple theorists and some of the theories that we've talked about in my class and ways you can think about anime more critically. We're going to talk about what anime can teach us, and then also, again, kind of end with this using anime in college toolkit and just some recommendations that I have for folks moving forward. So let's talk about college and development of ourselves. So there have been decades and decades and decades of research that's been done that looks at how college actually impacts our development as people through a wide variety of different lenses. So when we think about how college can shape us, not only in the way we think, but the way that we view our own identities, how those identities may grow and change, the way that we critically analyze the world around us, college has been found to be very instrumental in a lot of those different ways. And when we think about identity development and college, there's a couple theorists out there that I'm going to highlight in here, a couple things I've talked about with my students. So the first one is the model of multiple dimensions of identity. And what this talks about is how your different identities that you hold influence and inform one another. And this model really looks at how we are constantly being bombarded with external influences, whether that's from authority figures, our friends, our peer groups, media that we consume, news that we consume, all these different things. And we have this sort of filter or filtering process where we look and see how those different influences do or don't impact and shape our identity. And the more that you develop your identity in all these different ways, the more critical that lens becomes. So we get better and better at critically analyzing those influences. And then there is a theory from Baxter Magulda, very well known in higher ed circles, around self-authorship. And what this looks at is how you develop cognitively, interpersonally, and intrapersonally, and how those developmental stages that you reach throughout these different aspects of your life create a stronger cognitive understanding of your lived experiences in the world around you, your relationships, and also how your internal identity remains intact throughout that. So it's very much a longitudinal study looking at those different development stages and how they all inform how we interact with the world around us. So again, this is a very brief overview of theory. There are whole degree programs on this, but one of the other big ones looks at transitions and belonging. And so Dr. Tyrell Strayhorn is a very well-known researcher looking at sense of belonging. And what sense of belonging in his research has found is that when students have a higher sense of belonging, that leads to more engagement, not only in their classroom learning, but also outside of the classroom, which is our big goal as as educators in higher education, we want to find ways that students don't just go to class, go home, and repeat that cycle, but instead take what they're learning in the classroom, critically engage with it in the classroom setting, but then also utilize that information to continue to grow and develop outside of the classroom, whether that's through experiential learning like undergraduate research or internships, or even joining clubs or organizations, which continues to foster that sense of belonging. That not only shows that students are more likely to remain in college and eventually graduate, but also that development piece and that engagement is a crucial component of that sense of belonging as well. So when we think about transitioning to college too, that's another big factor around how we grow and learn and develop. Schlossberg is a big theorist in transition theory, where something was created that many of us know in higher ed circles as the 4S model, which looks at how do we move in, through, and out of transition. A lot of my work is working with students moving into the transition into college, and then how we help set them up to successfully move through and then eventually out of college. So what this looks at is the 4 S's, which is what is the situation that you are experiencing this transition in? What do you know about your own self? How do your identities play into this, your own development as a part of this process? What support do you have? And then what strategies have you learned or are you learning to cultivate to help you again move in, through, and out of that transition? So how can we use anime in all this? Where does that come in? So all of these big theories around identity development, cognitive development, psychosocial development, it can be a lot. And what anime does is provide this fictional testing ground almost, where we can see characters moving through some of these experiences that maybe do mirror what we're experiencing, or maybe act as that what if testing ground. What if I were to lose in a really challenging situation? How might I handle that? What if I were to be in conflict with someone I care about? How might I handle that? All these experiences that anime characters go through, there is a way that you can relate it to something that you're experiencing as well. Maybe with a little less magic, right? But it really can help us see these behaviors role modeled for us and give us an idea of, oh, if I meet a challenging situation or a challenging scenario or conflict, this is a blueprint that maybe I can refer to, or maybe is being role modeled for me of ways I can engage in those moments and maybe figure out and solve that conflict. So what I've found in using anime as a tool in the classroom is that when you apply these different theoretical lens to these characters, students begin critically analyzing the characters and the development arcs of the characters and figure out ways that it can almost be a mirror for themselves to analyze their own development. It also gives them the why. So when people say, oh, this character had great development, why? What is it about their development? It gives more language to that. Or when we say, this character is my favorite character, why is that? Again, it gives more of that critical lens to analyze the characters and to see maybe parts of ourselves that are parts that we wish we had, that we see reflected in these characters, but then gives us very real toolkits of, well, how do I get there? What do I need to work on developing? Or what are some challenges I might be facing that push me to engage in that way that I see role modeled before me? An example that I use in my classroom is we use different shows and anime movies paired with different peer-reviewed articles to talk about these larger theories and relate it back to our own development as college students. So my students really do engage with analyzing these characters and saying, well, how do their experiences maybe somewhat mirror what I'm experiencing? And how do I use these theories and tools to really deeply engage in that learning about myself and figure out ways to, again, keep that development going? And it also allows us to become critical consumers of media. So it, again, teaches my students how to analyze information coming at them, whether it's messaging through different shows and storylines or different characters, and how they're able to analyze that and make sense of it for themselves as well. So moving forward, when we talk about media and meaning making, there's been so much research that's been done about what audiences glean from different media that they consume that helps them tackle really difficult topics. One of my favorite ones is looking at students and motivation with anime, and how students shared that seeing characters from the show Naruto help them feel a sense of motivation for themselves. So even though they're not going through what Naruto's character is going through, the things that he was experiencing resonated with the students and motivated them to engage in their classwork, engage in a challenging homework assignment, and really find that internal motivation to complete their work based on what they saw the characters role modeling, and really learning resilience from these characters, which is huge, especially when we talk about college. And so, again, media is a powerful tool that even if you think you're a passive audience member, you're probably gleaning some lessons or experiences from what you're watching, and in a way, applying it to your own lived experiences or how you view yourself. So really, this is just a brief overview that is hoping to get more at how anime can be yet another way to engage college students with ways to understand and process through things like transition, coming to college, different stages of development that they might be experiencing, and how utilizing anime in college courses provides that familiar context for students to talk about really difficult or complex discussions in a way that may also, in its own way, foster a sense of belonging too with those students. So being able to find that shared interest and then building on it and connecting it to these larger academic themes and topics can be a great way for students to engage in that deeper learning, both in the classroom and then that engagement out of the classroom as well. I do have a couple recommendations for you all. So if you are not familiar with student development theory or higher education, student affairs, these are some basic theories you can look at. They have been utilized by theorists for many, many decades and have been built on. There's so many new iterations of these theories for different population groups that you can look into. But these are also ones I've used in my classroom too. So the first one, challenge and support, is a very simple, easy to understand theory from Stanford. There's also Baxter Magolda's self-authorship, which we talked about earlier too. And then one that I use quite often is Chickering and Ricer's 7 Vectors of Development, which again has been built on by many, many, many theorists that you can definitely find more information on, and ways that that has been reviewed and shaped and applied to students for many, many years. Some of the anime shows that I use as well, I've used Yuri on Ice, especially coupled with Chickering and Ricer, has been really helpful for my students. I've also used Jujutsu Kaisen, especially Jujutsu Kaisen Zero. The movie, I've talked about group development with My Hero Academia. And then A Sign of Affection is a newer anime, but I think it does a really good, I think it's a really good example of talking about ability and analyzing how ability is a part of our identity and ways that we may engage with folks who have differently, who are differently abled from us in our lived experiences too. So these are just a couple recommendations to get you started if you've never really thought about this. And again, I really do hope that you engage with me if you want to talk about any ideas. But thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit more about how you can use anime in this academic sense. And whether you're an educator, a student, or just an interested fan, hopefully this gets you thinking more about how you can critically engage in the anime that you consume as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this special Q&A session of the educational power of manga and anime. My name is Masami Toku, a professor of art education at California State University, Chico. I will be in charge of organizing the Q&A session based on pre-collected questions from you and following live discussion. Okay, first of all, I did want to appreciate Brent, Michael, and Emily. It is an honor for me to work with you. It was great to watch the summary of your research on manga and anime. I thought I knew Brent and Michael's research very well because we are the same art education major. But it was worthwhile to review and appreciate your great work and to be reminded how influential it has been on my own study of children's artistic and aesthetic development of how manga influence to children's mind and society. Emily, your video also showed me how anime is a great communicative tool that encourages students to survive and successfully in the higher education. Good job. Okay, oh, I should not forget, Japan Foundation, thank you so much for organizing this special topic of the educational power and manga and anime. Sakuya, Mio, you're just amazing. Thank you so much for inviting us and organizing this symposium. We have, believe it or not, more than 100 questions, even we close 1 week before from 9 countries. I check it out. US, Canada, Philippines, Panama, Japan, Indonesia, Colombia, Romania, and Taiwan. I'm sure maybe many more. It is impossible to respond to this all question. I hope, but I don't think so. So I have grouped these questions into 5 under 6 category. I will ask at least one presenter to respond to a particular question each category we selected. But and the other are, of course, welcome to continue to add their responses to the discussion. Okay, let me see. Oops, I just wanted to check it out. Oh, I better check the, cheating book. Okay, so let me see. Let me start it. Okay, first category I created called benefit and the effectiveness of manga and anime on children development. These questions are about how manga and anime are beneficial to support children's cognitive development, intellectually and psychologically, such as visual literacy skill. For example, question are there research that support the educational benefit of using anime and manga in the classroom? Another question is, how do you overcome the opinion of other educators and parents who don't think manga is real literature? I know many of the people might have. Okay, let's see. Emily and Michael, could you start to respond to those questions?
Yes, happy to. Thank you. So, on the first question around, is there research that supports the educational benefits of using anime and manga in the classroom? There is quite a bit of research out there, and I'm excited to say it keeps growing more and more. So, every year when I start building my class syllabus for my anime class, there's always new research that's been published. My two favorite articles that I keep going back to really look at how the power of anime can impact fans in many ways. One is by Dr. Iwasaki called Death and Existentialism in Anime, and looking at cells at work and how cells at work actually allows fans to take a really scary topic sometimes, figuring out what's going on in our bodies and putting it in a very educational and entertainment focus, which allows people to get these bite-sized bits of knowledge while being able to be entertained throughout it too. There's also a doctoral dissertation that was done by Dr. Migliano Reyes on using anime as a motivational tool for building resilience in college students. And what she found is that college students watching anime shows were able to see examples of persevering through challenging times, or what happens when you don't always win. How do you pull yourself up and get through that tough loss? And that actually helped them find motivation to do things like their classwork, their homework, study for their tests. And so there really is a lot of power out there in anime, and using it to build students' resilience and show them that it can be a really great way to not only build up their motivation and confidence in doing work, but to also find that connection within the characters that they're seeing on screen. So there is quite a bit of research out there, and I think that as fandom studies continues to grow, we'll continue to see more and more of that research too.
Yeah, I agree with Emily because when Brent and I started to work on the research more than 25 years, about 25 years ago, there's not much research, but now it's everywhere when you type it, like a manga, anime, like academic paper, boom, 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 boom. So it's no problem, right? Okay, Michael, how about you? How to deal with those people who don't think, manga anime is, working well for the literacy or so on, so on.
It's a question that I think is on every educator's mind when they think about bringing manga into the classroom. How am I going to convince my principal or the parents that this is okay or that this is quality literature? And I think one way to start is by sharing the range of wonderful manga out there related to history, to science, to literature, to ancient cultures and just showing the wealth of manga that's available, and that could be a wonderful pathway to reading and writing and listening and speaking, and to emphasize that the manga can be a pathway to all the books that represent classical literature, Shakespeare on forward, that there are themes that are parallel. There are language structures that are parallel. There are so many connections to make. And I think the reason why we would want to do that is because the children, the students, are so excited about manga as literature. Well, when they bring excitement already to the classroom, you're halfway there. And so to leverage that excitement, to leverage those interests, I think there is a lot of power there. And I think there is some good opportunities to convince people that manga could have a place in the classroom or in the school.
You
I
know,
agree. Yeah,
uh,
Brent,
as
go ahead.
it just reminds me, as Dr. Uh, Masami Toku and I were interviewing famous mangaka, we found one. Masami, you will remember her name. It's Michiko.
Machiko Satonaka.
Oh,
Machiko
who
Satonaka.
did Nanjing at, I mean, the Japanese experience in China, which was sort of not very well known in Japan. It was a part of their history that many would like to cover up or forget about. And
I'm
she
sorry.
did
It is a
very,
Keiko Takemiya. I gave you wrong name. Keiko Takemiya.
but they did just deep research. In other words, they were historians. They were trying to make sure that it was absolutely accurate. And so, I mean, it's this art form, like any other, you can find superficial things, you can find very deep things. And one of the things an educator might do is help to guide young people to the things that educate them the most or the most edifying.
Yeah, that's true, Brad. Because to work on to creating the manga, they have to research about manga itself behind the story. So that's why. And Michael Bates' comic book project is a good example how children are encouraged to develop their own literacy skills. So that's why you are so successful. Yeah, amazing. Parents use it manga, but you have to choose it, which one is a good one. Anyway, okay, thank you. Wonderful. Do you want to ask something for this question? Is that okay? Okay, so next category I organize it is the usage of manga and anime for literacy and language learning. These questions are about how to adapt manga and anime into literacy and language learning. For example, questions are manga and anime can be used in subjects such as literature, history, and psychology, offering unique perspective and engaging content that can enhance student understanding. Agree. How can we utilize? Big question. Brent and Michael, can you start to respond to this question?
Michael, go ahead.
Well, yes, I think that manga can be a wonderful opportunity for language learning and learning about cultures. And from my perspective and in my experience, reading manga absolutely can have a wonderful impact on the students. But the opportunity to create manga using language context. Um, and we all know the phrase, a picture tells a thousand words. So if you're struggling with a language, to be able to tell your story through pictures and text combined together as part of your manga, there's a lot of power there in the opportunity to create your narrative, design your characters. We say in the comic book project, there's only one rule, and that is your characters and your storyline must be original. And so, as long as you are following that creative spark that you have within you, you can use manga to create history narratives, science lab reports, and of course, in the context of learning language, could be a great opportunity to write a story which would be very difficult if you were new to that language, if you're writing it in paragraphs. But if you were able to create it in a manga format, there's a real opportunity to grow your language usage, to understand idioms and contexts. So I really do believe that there's a wonderful opportunity for manga to play that role. I'll pass it to you, Brent.
Well, I think of two forms of communication, the visual and the verbal. And in the case of manga, they feed one another, reinforce one another. It's like they're having a continual conversation. I was just reminded of watching uh, kindergarten teachers. This was in Taipei, and the kids would draw, and then the teachers would say, "Well, what's happening in your drawing?" And the children would tell a little story. As the children told the story, the teachers were writing the story. And what happened? The kids were learning to read and write, but starting with their images. It was an absolutely beautiful process. And of course, that continues all through the creation of uh, a manga or doujinshi story, because the visual and the verbal are are conversing with one another through the whole process.
Okay. Emily, do you want to add something about the anime?
Yeah, I would agree. I know in my classroom when we show different anime shows or movies, my students are always pulling these observations about the characters and their development and finding a way for it to resonate for them. So even though, anime takes place in very magical lands, right? They're still finding these moments where they're able to say, that feels like what I'm going through right now. And that's very impactful. I mean, we get a lot of our external contexts that influence us when we're very young, and especially when we're in college, going through that transition into college. Whenever we have these external inputs coming at us, we're filtering through those to figure out, well, what is really standing out to me? What am I going to kind of take and sit with and really see how this impacts my own identity, how I see myself, values I hold. And I think there is a really strong case for anime that is doing that for a lot of students. I think when you ask people to say, why is that your favorite anime character? They go in a lot of detail about things they've seen the character experience that they connect to their own lived experience. So I think it's a very powerful tool in understanding more about ourselves as well.
Yeah, my colleague of Japanese language professor at the CSU Chico, actually, he used a four-panel art project because when I took an ESL, I was encouraged to think about the four: introduction, supporting sentence, transition, and conclusion. And then he adapted the idea into the four visual images: introductional images, transitional images, supporting and transitional conclusion. And I was quite, impressed. Oh my God, he used the same idea what I'm doing. So that's why it's quite good, strong power and the tool of adapting manga anime into the especially language like a study. I really agree. Yeah. Anything? Do you want to add more? It's okay. Brent, looks like you wanted to say something more, but okay, let me go
Well,
to.
as I was thinking about all of the things we learned as we were studying manga in Japan, I thought of the little character Doraemon, who
I
is,
love.
when we talk about age appropriateness, here is a little character that 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds have, in one sense, they love. Well, here is an atomic powered robot cat who has come from the 22nd century. It is Nobita's great great grandson who sends Doraemon back to help little Nobita, who is a kind of poor student, lazy, not achieving much. And here is this little robot cat from the future who comes back, and he has this pouch that is full of gadgets that will solve almost any problem or difficulty that Doraemon and Nobita get into. And I begin to think about these two characters are like all children because they're it helps them to say, hey, I have difficulties or I can't do this, but I have a friend with resources who can help me to solve problems. And I think this is one of the outcomes of the popularity of this little character who goes back to 1969. In other words, he's been around for a half century, more than half a century, telling Japanese kids and then kids in all parts of the world. I think Disney has actually purchased the rights for it in the United States. But here are these two little characters, one who has lots of difficulties and a little friend who can help him solve problems. And if you combine the two, this is helping children to say, this is how I have to develop. This is how I can develop. I can overcome difficulties. I can find problems to my solutions to my problems. And so it's just marvelous lessons that come from this popular art form and this little improbable character or two improbable characters. So there is just so much that can be learned.
Yeah, Doraemon is a great character. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So next category, so I created is category 3, kind of similar, a group adapting manga and anime in classrooms. So these questions are about how to adapt manga and anime in education, PK through 12th grade and higher education. Okay, let me repeat. PK mean in America, P preschool, K is a kindergarten through 12th means a high school. So preschool to high school and higher education is a college level because different country, different systems. So, but anyway, so I chose a couple of questions. First one, in what school subject can manga and anime be integrated? It's amazing, but a big question. And the next one is more related to art education. I use manga to show my student various art technique and style. However, I struggle with related them to some of the elements of art aside from line and texture. How can manga be used to convey other elements of art such as color, form, value, and space? Okay, let me just explain what is the elements of art. In America, we use elements of art as a kind of component of the art, like a language of art, like a line, shape, color. So we have and the elements of manga, space, and the word and the bubble and the picture. It's kind of elements which compose art. Okay, so I think Emily, Brent, maybe you can start to kind of respond to those questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about what subjects and ways you can use anime and manga in the classroom, especially in the college level. I've seen a lot of people do some really creative things with manga and anime. I've seen manga used in creative writing classes. I use anime in my class to teach my students a wide variety of theories from student development theory, leadership theory, group development theory, identity formation, really graduate school level theories we're able to talk to them about and they're able to critically engage with when we use anime as this medium to talk through it and what these actually look like. I also know there's some physics instructors who have used anime as a way to make learning about physics and doing math in STEM really fun. There's a great panel at Anime Expo I went to last year called The Physics of Anime, where they took scenes from different anime shows and actually did the math to say, can we prove that this could actually happen, or can we disprove it? And I think it's a really creative way to be able to adapt what you're learning in the classroom, sometimes these really complex theories or equations, and when you put it with something that students are already interested in or already have a passion about, it makes it more easily digestible, and they critically engage in a really deep way when they're able to take these formulas or theories and really apply them to things that they're already really interested in and that they get a lot out of. So a lot of ways you can use it in the classroom. And there's a lot of activities that I also use in my classroom to kind of build on that and get that experiential piece out. But I'll turn it to Michael to talk more about the art education side too.
Okay. Brent, Michael, so go ahead.
Michael, go ahead.
Well, in terms of the art education piece, I think that going deep into manga in terms of its construction, its techniques, and of course, there are lots of wonderful videos that are available to show artists, not just the finished manga, but showing from sketch points to all the way to the completed pieces, to show beyond the techniques of line and form, like the question was talking about, but to get deep into the all the elements that make up a wonderful manga. I did want to say one thing about bringing manga into schools on the K-12 level. Emily was talking about the college experience. On the K-12 level, I think things get a little bit tricky because, in my experience, especially on the high school level, the students that I've worked with really want to read authentic manga from Japan, translated into English, but ones that may not be appropriate for a school setting in terms of their content, in terms of the romantic elements, the potential violence. So, what a publisher or a school might think to do is, well, let's bring in manga, but that's been kind of scrubbed clean for the school market. My experience is that the students don't really want to read that manga. They want to read the manga that they were passionate about and that they were pulling off the bookshelves. And so I think it's a little bit of a conundrum in terms of the appropriateness of the authentic manga versus what a publisher might put in to attract students' interest. I think one way to alleviate that kind of tension again is to encourage the students to create their own manga stories, share them with each other, publish them in doujinshi, we've been talking about, and Brent has been saying about the experience in Japan. That there might be a middle ground there for the students to create authentic manga, share it with each other, but maybe have some rules and some guardrails to keep it appropriate for the school market. I'll pass it over to Brent.
Well, I'm glad the two of you have set this up because I have the same thoughts that Michael has. Well, let me start by saying I think that manga is an art form that can be studied as a part of the history of art. And there we could study the history of manga. And there we could look at things that could easily be appropriate in school. But what I think you're absolutely right, that for the creation of manga, it almost needs to be outside of the control of adults. Assistance from adults is needed. In other words, I think that the doujinshi movement in Japan was a result of what Yonezawa did by creating the first comic market. Once there was an opportunity to show and sell work, more kids began to do it, and more and more and more. Before long, we have 36,000 groups who are showing their work to 750,000 kids. And that's amazing. And this is all happening outside of school, outside of the control of adults. Is it educational? Absolutely. It is perhaps one of the best kinds of education. When you start creating a character and then giving that character a personality and then putting that character in situations where they lack something or some sort of tragedy happens, they have to overcome it. This is practice for living. It's a way to understand oneself and the way to understand the future and the way to understand what is good and bad and so on. But it is the individual who is doing the selecting. It's not teacher directed. It can be after school teacher assisted. And so I think that we have the safe and almost approaching it from the art historical and interpretive point of view in the classroom. And at the college level, you have more opportunities that you don't have to contend with parents who are objecting to what the students might be saying. Oh, maybe you have a little bit, but you can deal with it differently, perhaps than you can in a high school or elementary school. But the outside of school programs where the kids organize themselves and then use the venues of the internet and the comic markets and so on that give the kids incentive to keep going and to get the recognition they need and so on. That is educational, but it's what I call the third educational site. I think kids working individually on their own, creating characters individually by themselves, that's the first site. Then we have a second site, which is the school classroom. But then we have the third site where the kids are taking charge and sometimes with the assistance of adults, but the kids are really in charge and they're doing what they need and what they see as useful to themselves and entertaining and involving and so on. And they work harder at that than anything they do. And that's amazing.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. Um, can I jump in? Okay. I
Yes, indeed.
think adapting manga in a curriculum has a two direction. One is mainly people doing, like Michael, using the manga technique, and the children using the manga character, and they're creating their own story, like a manga and the book itself. Another direction is adapting the concept or characteristic manga. It's not necessary to be exactly and borrowing the idea of how to draw. For example, like I said, for panel art, I give the idea introduction, supporting, and transitional and conclusion. I gave my student to choose one particular famous art, like Van Gogh's, like Starry Night, and the Dali, persistent memory. Based on those, artworks they selected, they create their own story. For example, Van Gogh's Starry Night, they start to draw, and then J, talking about the pollution. And then persistent memory, like a melting body, they use that is images as a conclusion. They're talking about global warming. So manga has so many contexts. So that's why, and using directly how to draw manga and then how to create the anime. But also another direction is adapting the, characteristic and the value of manga and anime, and they create in different form. So two-way is great. So depend on the age group, and depending on the how they are, conceptual, like knowledge is higher or not so. So simply we can say so many ways of creating the curriculum. So just I wanted to say, because many people misunderstood, okay, so how to teach how to draw manga into the class. No, 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 no. You don't have to teach how to draw manga. It is not a, goal. Go beyond. You have to, support the children to create and support their own visual literacy skill.
Yes, I think
Make
that
sense?
I think that is a really important point. What I have found is that when we see the narrative, the story, then to tell the story well, the kids acquire the skills, all of the things that our teachers worry about, having to do with basic design. Those things are learned naturally by the creator in an effort to create and tell the best story they can. And so it is the narrative that pushes and coaxes the student to become better and better and better.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's great. We cannot stop talking, but let me go to the next category. Okay, so what did I create? Oh, next category. 4. Resources, recommendation of manga anime title for the classroom. So many people asking, oh, I want to, introduce, but I don't know which one is a good resources for manga anime. So let's see. I'm sure each of the presenter have their own preference. Emily, can you start first?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually published an older syllabus of my class in the Journal of Anime and Manga Studies. So if anyone is looking for articles that I found really useful at the college level that talk about anime research and fandom research, there's a lot in there. I would say when it comes to certain readings that I really point my students to when teaching them how to read about anime research and fandom research in an academic way. There's a great article called Consuming Anime where it looks at, excuse me, online fandoms and how online fans naturally start talking about representation in anime from race and ethnicity to gender and really going into these really deep conversations that they just create together in online forums, which is really cool to just be able to see the way that students critically are analyzing anime. They're not just passive consumers. So that's one article I always really love to bring up to my students. But when we talk about anime shows, I definitely have a few of my favorites that I use in my class. One is Yuri on Ice. It's a great show at the college level to talk about a lot of different development theories, especially around emotional development. That's a really big one. I also tend to utilize My Hero Academia. That one is one where my students really enjoy
Popular
it.
one.
Yeah, a lot of yeah, it's a very popular show. A lot of my students are fans, but it does a really good job of talking about group development theory and leadership theory, and also seeing that representation in the characters when they don't always win, and the emotions that a lot of the male characters display is something that my students talk a lot about when it comes to comparing, heroes in anime shows compared to American heroes in traditional comics or superhero movies. There's a lot of really interesting differences that they really like to pick up and talk about. And then personally, I love Jujutsu Kaisen. I think that's a great
Mhm.
show to also talk about, again, group development, leadership. And it's, again, a really popular show that my students are typically already watching as well. Those are just a couple that I've used before. But I work really closely with my university librarian when it comes to looking at manga that we can bring in. Any requests that they've seen that they've been getting has been really helpful. And then I do try to work with my library to purchase any shows or movies that I plan to show so my students are able to access it outside of the classroom. Although many of my students already have, streaming services that they use to watch it outside of the classroom. But and then a resource that I found really helpful, especially for educators that are looking for, what shows or movies might be really helpful to show to different age groups. There's a great book called Manga in Libraries, and that author, Julian Roods, actually does kind of break down some recommendations for different age groups and topics that you're looking to talk about with anime and manga. So those are just a couple that I use that have been really popular with my students. I've also used some that haven't really been talked about a lot, like Sabiki Bisco. And then I used one anime to talk about transition theory called Why Ray Liotta Ended Up in the Duke's Mansion, which is really fun. So a lot of different ways I think that there you can incorporate those, but those are just a couple examples that I've used as resources in my classroom.
Michael and Brand, do you have any recommendation that you like it? I think it's, and some questions say how to update the collection. I think you don't have to be worried about, updating collection because more than 40% of the entire publication in Japan is a manga. It's impossible. So that's why Emily said, checking through the online, like, what is the top 10 favorite manga? What's the top 10 and the favorite and the anime? And then teacher, you are welcome to watch check by yourself. I'm sure one of the, collection might be your favorite. So you don't have to, follow any other people's preferences. Trust yourself, which is good for the students. So I love that, because my generation, I love the classic. Okay, anyway. And Michael, do you have any suggestion?
Those are great suggestions by Emily. And I would just like to put forth one suggestion is that on the Comic Book Project website, which is comicbookproject.org, you can download the manga created by the high school students from Manga High. So you could actually experience their publication as part of your manga collection. And I just think that would be a really interesting comparison to the traditional or even the current manga that is coming out of Japan, to compare and contrast some of the inner city New York City high school students. So I'd like to just add that to the list.
Brent, do you have it?
Well, I, like you, am sort of stuck in the traditions and going back to Doraemon and Astro Boy and so on. Uh, so I think here I want to take my cues from where the kids are and let them lead the way. Let them show us in many cases because they are selecting things that meet the interests and we could say the needs that they have, what helps them to see themselves and to learn how to live in their contemporary world. And they they leave me behind, which is fine. I let them drag me along.
Mhm. Um, in Japan, manga is always, I say traditionally, manga is always primary media and the anime was and the secondary media. Mostly cases when manga published and when some and the theme became so popular, those are adapted into animation. So, and looking back to my and young time, long time ago, when I go back to check it, some good manga are published as an anime at the same time. For example, my favorite Miyazaki's film is actually Nausicaa. Naushka is a story about the princess who survived after the, this war because of a pollution. But anyway, manga is actually published as a 5 volume, more than five maybe. It's more philosophical. It's deeply thinking about how we have to live in. And then they have also anime version. This is, less than 2 hours. So quality of manga are impossible to be adapted into 2 hours animation. But Miyazaki loved and doing the anime because he can catch many audiences at the same time. Manga is one can buy. But my point is, if you have a chance, go to, those kind of theme published in manga and anime, you will learn so many different things. It's classic, but classic does not mean that outdated at all. Like Osamu Tezuka's Phoenix, Hinotori, it's just amazing. So luckily, his manga is again more than 5 volume, but Tezuka production published as anime and the series. So that's why, unlike one shot and the anime movie film, we can continue to see each volume. So that is also kind of my Bible that I learn how to live. Yeah. But anyway, check it out. Now is that all information is out there onto the online. I guess so. You don't have to follow my preference. This is just, our preference. Okay, so let's see. I have to actually, and speed up. Category 5 is, this is a very tricky question, but an interesting question. Allow it. Manga versus anime. Or manga and anime versus comics and cartoon. These questions are about the differences and similarity between manga and anime, and the differences between manga, anime versus Western comic and cartoon. Let's see. I chose Brent. Do you want to talk about it? Or do you want to, give kind of, I love this question, but it might be tricky a little bit. Mhm.
Well, what I find fascinating is that it was after World War II that the American occupation force brought American comic books to Japan. So there we saw the Superman and Captain Marvel and the Walt Disney characters and so on. And uh, so this gave impetus to individuals like Tezuka Osamu. And it was an influence on his work. And then his work began to influence other Japanese mangaka. And so it was the American influence that started the 20th century, mid 20th century manga movement. But then what do we see happening now? I'm absolutely fascinated by the fact that Michael's students had little use for Superman and the American action comics. They were learning more from and a much more favorable attitude toward the manga. Why? Because it was what they needed. So our comics spurred manga, and then manga got out of Japan and began to influence the entire world. And it's just an absolutely fascinating story of how the kids are seeing what fascinates them, and in one sense, I think what they also need, or what is educating them for how to see themselves and how to live in their worlds.
Mhm. Emily, you as an anime person for this topic. So do you have any idea? So the question manga versus anime.
Yeah, I love this question because I start out my class every semester by asking my students, why anime? Out of all the different types of media, Western animation, American cartoons, American superhero movies and comics, why do you pick anime? And to the point, that Brent was making earlier, and I think what all of us have kind of said in one way or another, they tell me how the stories that the characters, how the characters move through stories gets at a deeper level for them than what they see in other forms of media. And I'll go back to my Hero Academia example. When I've had students write papers, I have them take a character from an anime that they really love and analyze the character through a theory that we talk about in class. And I had a student who wrote this wonderful paper on Deku from My Hero Academia and talking about how Deku was one of the first characters that they saw who was able to be a hero and still be vulnerable. And so, this piece around it's okay to experience emotion and to show emotion, and you can still be a hero, versus some of the messaging they got growing up from other cartoons or American media was, you have to keep down the emotion, you have to rise to the occasion, and you can't show fear, you can't be, sad or grieve in the moment. And that was a really powerful story for that student to engage in and that representation to be seen in that character.
That's
Uh,
right.
and so I definitely think that when the more common response I hear from my students when I ask that question, why anime, is the depth of the story that they can get out of it, and then the emotional piece. They talk a lot about how emotions in anime are so the focal point. How a character develops is really the point of it versus always, beating the bad guy in most cases. So that's what really comes up to my students. And I think it echoes what Brent was just saying too about students will seek out that media that gives them what they're wanting to see and what they need. And that's why I believe that anime for my students can be a really powerful form that they really turn to for that too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm also curious. And Michael, your student pointed out they chose Japanese manga, not American comic. Why are they?
Yes. The students in that particular school were absolutely dedicated to manga. One of them told me, "Manga is my life." Even though on the surface, their connection to Japan wouldn't seem to be evident, they had adopted this literature and this art as their own, both in terms of consuming the manga that was being produced, but also creating and publishing their own manga. But I will say that I've been in other classrooms in other settings where some of the youth are creating manga and some are creating more American style comics or creating their own new version of what comics could be. And I think it goes to both what Brent and Emily were saying that it really depends on the interest of the learner. That if they get the opportunity to explore a direction where they can pursue their interests and turn those interests around into creating a product, whether it's a comic or an animation. We can't even predict what direction it would go in. So when we have that learner-centered approach where they get to make the decision, we'll see manga, we'll see other kinds of comics, we'll see things we never imagined. And I think that's really a very powerful way of approaching an educational experience.
That's true. That's true. It's a big question, but I'm very curious. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Time is a little bit running out before going to live question and answer. Let's see. Last one, I really wanted to ask you, actually, and three of you, but the question is, and what would be the most important thing for young people who are just starting to gain an interest in anime and manga to learn? Michael, can you start to talk about it?
Well, I think one thing would be related to what Emily was talking about in building a community around manga, finding others of your peer group who are really interested in the same thing that you are, and form a community around learning about new books, developing new styles, having sketchbook parties together. Because if you are just on your own, kind of tinkering with manga, I think that it wouldn't be nearly as fulfilling as if you find that community of others who are pursuing the same kind of ideals. So I think building community is the first piece. And from there, to just explore your creative ideas, your creative identities, sketch all the time, read all the time, consume as much manga as you can and that you want. And of course, if it's done out of love and a passion for manga, then it's not a chore. It's just something that you'll just keep doing. So that's where I would suggest starting.
Okay. How about you, Emily?
Yeah, I would echo everything Michael said, and I really, really want to touch on what he mentioned about finding a community around it. At my university, we have a really active anime club, especially on Discord. And so, even if it's online, there are ways that you can connect with folks who will share recommendations with you. My anime club has a whole channel on their Discord app where they just share fan art that they create, and they're so positive and they build each other up around it. They share story ideas that they want to create. And so, really, that community piece can help you find your folks and to start really kind of getting more of those recommendations and finding what you're looking for when it comes to engaging in the world of anime and manga.
Okay,
Yeah.
how about you, Brand?
Well, I find many, many children who, in their sketchbooks and in their school books and wherever, are creating characters. But I think you're both right, Emily and Michael, that it is the community that helps the kids to move to another level, the narrative level of creating a story. And so I think, Emily, you at one point you suggested that the comic markets in America are so different from the ones in Japan, where here it's the narrative, the telling of the story and the creation of doujinshi, it just hasn't taken hold. It's in Japan where the kids are making their own groups, their own little societies. And this is where the growth really takes place. Where the one group that I studied in Taipei, where they selected, they invite kids into the group, but then they critique one another's work because there is a reputation of the entire group that they have to uphold. And so it's got to be good enough for our group. And so this is a powerful tool for them to create better and better and better works. So community is tremendously important. It moves kids from drawing characters to making life-changing narratives.
Okay, thank you so much. These are, questions I prepared to share with you to ask you guys to respond. Again, it was impossible to respond to all questions, but we did, try our best to and discuss it. And then maybe next question coming from live. Sakuya, do you want to join? I think is next is the live question and the answer with the audiences.
Hi everyone, I'm
Yeah,
back.
I'm going to, yeah. Okay,
Oh,
I'm going to quickly go to,
oh, hold on. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, hi, I'm back. Thank you so much for a great discussion. Now I'd like to pick some questions from live audiences. And first question is about while anime and manga are excellent resources, however, these are not very accessible for students with limited resources. Any recommendation for open resources? So before ask these questions to you, I first would like to introduce the resource that Japan Foundation have. So that is our Japan Foundation's online library. So anyone looking for free manga resources, be sure to check out the Japan Foundation's online library, where you can access many popular manga series translated into English for free, like
I'm back.
okay. Including Naruto, Jujutsu Kaisen, Demon Slayer, almost every title that I mentioned today during the event. Like you can find them in the online library. It's also includes not only manga, but also books by today's panelists, Japanese language textbook, and much more, like guidebook to Japan or something like that. So you can find a link in the description box. So please note please note the library is only available to users in the US and in Canada. But if you live in the US and in Canada, and if you're an educator, you can have a free access to those mangas to read them before introduced to your students. Or if they're already high school students, they can borrow the manga as well, by themselves. So please check it out. And any other free resources you come up on your mind that you know?
I would just say that here in New York City, our public libraries have become really great manga magnets, and their sections are growing as I've seen them. So I would say have a conversation with your public librarian and talk with them about the manga you're interested in and the manga that's on the shelf. And I think most librarians would be interested to get some information and get some voice from their constituents about the kind of manga that you would like to see in the library. So don't be afraid to talk with your librarian at the public library. There's actually a very growing, great resource there.
Any live question, Sakuya?
Yeah. So the next question is, so while we discuss how we can use their anime and manga for the people who are just starting to gain an interest in anime and manga to learn, any advice how to use manga anime in a teacher training college classroom, a future teacher?
Can I respond? Yeah, because I'm teaching the student to be art educator, classroom teacher, K through 12. So, and one of my course I just started after the research of manga for a long time. It's called Manga and Beyond. So children and the student are highly influenced and interested in drawing using manga and anime. So that's why we have a necessity to adapt the concept in the curricula. So that's I'm pretty sure many of the art educators using the manga and the anime into the curriculum to encourage the future teacher to adapt it. So there's so many ways. So one of my program is say 4-panel art manga. Title is What's Going On in This World. So another one is Yurukara, local mascot. Yurukara is a kind of local mascot which try to present about the characteristic of local community. So like Hello Kitty, you might know about the images, but Hello Kitty, you can see so many Hello Kitty. Tokyo Hello Kitty, Osaka and Hello Kitty, and the Hello Kitty wearing the characteristic. So that's using kind of visual pop culture into the curriculum, encourage students to look for their identity, to find their own characteristic about their own culture. So they're creating a lots of projects. So anyway, my student they are encouraged to create the lesson plan too. So that's we have a lot of. So I'm happy to donate those kind of lessons to the Japan Foundation New York, so you can and share with the student. Yeah. Also, one more thing, Japanese and government, Ministry of Education and Science adapted manga and anime, visual pop culture into the national curriculum, especially 7th and 8th grade. It's so ironically, manga and anime are not allowed for art educator to teach, to even think about it into the curriculum. But we are no control anymore. The value popularity is all over the world. So that's why government finally accepted in 1998 and they started to, include the concept character into the lesson and their national curriculum in 2001. So I think, and we are happy to contact the many art educators in Japan. They will definitely create the tons of lesson plan. But again, that is not how to draw manga. That is not how to create anime. Using the, and value and the concept into. Make sense? Yeah. It's very popular. Yeah. I'm sure if you, check the internet and the lesson plan with Japanese manga or anime, I'm sure there are lots of, lesson plans coming out.
That's great. Yeah. Any other comments? Like how to utilize the manga anime for the future teachers?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I'm working on a project right now analyzing how different anime teachers and shows use pedagogy in the show. And so looking at characters like Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen and Koro Sensei from Assassination Classroom, there are some really powerful ways that those characters as teachers approach different unique student situations or different challenges when it comes to educating students, and also how they employ different activities with their students in the show that you can actually really adapt in your own classroom, in your lived reality. So I think even as an educator watching anime, I think you'd be surprised at how much you kind of pick up and take notes on, that you can even see the characters kind of acting out for you, that you can turn into classroom pedagogical tools as well.
And I was going to add that in the context of teacher education, which is the space I work in as well, that it's important for aspiring teachers to know about manga, even if they themselves are not manga fans or didn't grow up with it, because so many of their students will be pursuing manga. In their classrooms, hopefully not hiding under the desk or hiding in the locker reading manga, but something that could be integrated into the literature of the classroom, to just have a basic foundational knowledge about manga and anime, so that you can build that bridge with your students. So that not so that you become an expert in yourself, but to learn from them as they're learning from you, and you can have this two-way conversation about art and literature. So I think that just that opportunity to have a foundational knowledge across the teacher education space could be very valuable, in manga and maybe other subject areas as well that the youth would be bringing into the classroom. This sort of general knowledge about pop culture, to be able to have this connection with your students.
Yeah, thank you. Brent, anything to add? Okay. So the next question is, so I think I interpreted the question, but does the lack of diversity in Japanese manga have still impact on the diverse readers in schools? Like, for example, like a black and a brown students?
Well, I can start there in that so many of the characters that the students in New York City were pursuing didn't look like them at all. And on the surface wouldn't represent them. But because the power of art and literature, and of course music and dance and drama, transcend cultural and national identities and the barriers that we humans tend to build for ourselves, manga can just break it right down. And even though the character may not seemingly represent the reader or the creator. When you start to understand the stories and you start to talk with the students about the kinds of characters they're creating, the storylines they're pursuing, you realize, well, in fact, this does represent this creator, but not on a superficial level. It goes deeper than just, the way the character's hair might look or the way the eyes might be shaped. And so I just think that there are, art and literature and the arts in general transcend the kinds of things that we tend to pigeonhole or stereotype a student, whether they're from New York City or anywhere else. So I think there's an opportunity to break barriers through manga, because it goes beyond just what's on the page. There's so much more meaning and about identity and exploration beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. As Masami and I were studying yaoi, or boys' love, as we would talk to the creators, they would say, this isn't reality. It was girls who were creating romantic relationships between boys. And I think it was Fred Schott who said, look, they're practicing their own romance, but putting the relationship at a distance from themselves, a relationship where the male is one removed from them, and it gives them more freedom to experiment. So that there are more opportunities for adventures and for character changes and what have you, if you're slightly removed from the character. So we were talking about superficial characteristics and the depth of what it means to be a human. And you can practice those things with someone who looks like you or someone who looks very different from you. And maybe the very different gives you more opportunities than the one who looks like you.
True.
Yeah. Thank you. So next question is, so because manga series, just as novels do, are effective at conveying universal themes, such as like the power of justice, the importance of friendship, etc., are there any advantages that the genre of manga has in conveying such universal themes over novels? As in very like a wide topic about like visual power. Yeah.
As myself Japanese, and I grew up in the island, southern island, far away from Tokyo. Manga is the only one resources for me to learn what's going on in Tokyo, what's going on in the world. Because as many people know about it, there's so many diverse genre. So one of the genre is educational manga. And then many, like a difficult topic are translated into the manga style, like a mathematics and also physics, so on, so on. And like a personalized, human character can teach about how to, work, like organ, so on, so on. But also I learned politics from the Gorgo 13, one of the very famous assassin story, what's going on in the world. And then the manga of politics was much more interesting than textbook in junior high and high school. So that's why manga has a strong power. So people think about it, just entertain. That's not true. Entertain at the same time, studying tour. So, and I know it might be, difficult to choose, which one is more educational than the other or more interesting, but, you can, check it out. Now is the internet world. You can, check the categorize, different theme of a manga. You can see there's so many. I am so surprised that I also learn from my the American student. Say, Masami, go to check the internet. You don't have to pay the big money to buy the book in America. So that's why, and I really appreciate it from the diverse theme of a manga. I learn pretty much from manga more than college. Oh, I'm sorry, Emily.
Yeah, any other comments like the advantage over novels?
Easy to
Yeah,
access. Yeah.
yeah. I
Novel
can
is
talk about
wonderful
one.
too.
Yeah, one project that we did was right on the Mexican border in the Imperial Valley in California, and so many non-native English speakers, and they just were not ready to read novels. The paragraphs were too overwhelming. There's too many words on the page. You know, imagine learning a new language and you're confronted with so many words on a page. Um, when the opportunity came to create comics and read comics that other students had created, suddenly they were starting to absorb vocabulary, be able to connect words with pictures, be able to start to write their own sentences in ways that weren't really happening with the traditional methods of the workbook and the textbook. And so I feel like manga and comics in general, there's a power there to support the sequence of the story, the quality of the narrative, the images that are represented, while building a scaffold. In education, we talk about building a learning scaffold all the time. So I feel like comics do that. As you're working through a narrative, the images and the sequence, the panels, they show you so much of what you're interpreting, that you'll eventually be able to read novels and paragraphs and long stories in that language. But I think comics can be a wonderful bridge in getting you there.
Mm. Any comments on this? Other comments?
Yeah, I would say from the college level, we teach our students how to annotate, journal articles that they're reading or long form, works that they read for their classes. And I can tell you, my students will have so many thoughts and feelings. They can critically analyze just one panel from a manga, because of the emotion that the panel is able to convey visually for them. And so in the college level, I think it's just another way to critically analyze different representations of storytelling and the message that you try to think through, that the author is trying to get across in that moment with that scene. My students will go on for days and do their own papers, just trying to, convince me of what this one panel really is trying to get out through the visualization that's taking place. So I do think it's also another form of engaging critically with media and art, and then being able to use those annotation skills in another way too.
We say visual images has more communicative power than just writing, generally speaking. So that's why, and regardless of any style of art form, like a manga or just painting, so on, visual images are strong, semiotic sign to communicate with people, I think. So manga is now one of the good example.
Yeah, actually, like I met the high school teacher who has like, who collects their novel and like a comics like with of the same title. So like students can pick either of them depend on like the level of their English or depend on their interest. So I thought that's very interesting, like a smart way. And then we also we can see how the expression change in between to those medias. Yeah, thank you. So because we are running out of time, if there's a last question from live audiences, I'm sorry that there was a question that we couldn't answer this time, but thank you so much for everyone for your great question. And then Masami, do you want to ask a closing question? Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Well, thank you so much. Because I met so many great researchers through this session, so I have a big question. Hope you know you can respond. My question is, well, I'd like to ask one last question of all of you. There are so many research topics in your academic area. What made you decide to research manga and or anime? In brief, What was the reason or experience that encouraged you to go into manga and anime? Then, what about your future? What are the next step, next stage, and your goal for your research based on your finding? Can you? Yeah, very, very interesting because we belong to academia. There are so many, research themes. Why did you choose it?
Mm,
I'm so
I'm
appreciative.
interested in that. I'd like
Yeah.
to know.
Okay, Emily, you wanna start?
Sure. My personal story is I remember in my first master's program, I was studying for my comprehensive exams, and it was a lot of just reading and memorizing all these theories. And I had Fairy Tale on in the background, and I was a couple hundred episodes into this anime show. And I remember at one point I heard the characters say something to each other, and I looked up from my work that I was studying, and I said, "Oh my gosh, that's the theory that I'm researching. It's playing out right in front of me." And that really sparked my interest in trying to find a way to bridge, student development theory, identity formation in college, transition theory with going to college, and being able to tie that into anime because I saw so many themes showing up in anime that directly related to what these theories were talking about. So that really is kind of my why for getting interested in that. And I'm a lifelong anime fan from the time I was young, watching Spirited Away and Dragon Ball Z, all the way to now. And in the future, my research areas are very widespread. My doctoral research project is not related to anime, actually, but um, what I really hope to do is explore more of how anime can be a powerful tool for educators, specifically newer faculty members and instructors at the university level, ways that they can learn pedagogy and teaching styles from anime. So that's my hope for my
Mhm.
future research.
That's great. Thank you. Michael, I'm sure you have a lots of idea and lots of reason.
My entry into the world of comics and manga was a little bit sideways. I was working as a senior research associate on a project called Learning in and Through the Arts, and this was in the mid to late 90s. And just the context, if people remember, this research that was later debunked about the Mozart effect, that if you listen to Mozart music, you'd suddenly get better at math. And it came to be such a mania that pregnant women were putting headphones on their stomachs so that their babies would listen to Mozart before they were born. And what this study was showing was that that is not how it works. If there's going to be a connection between the arts and learning and the academic subjects, it has to be very authentic and very purposeful and long term. And so I was looking for media that were already in tune with that. And comics were the perfect connection between visual literacy and traditional literacy. From there, I stumbled into manga by meeting all the kids who were making comics in the manga style and teaching me about the Japanese style and all about Sailor Moon and about Bleach and all the manga that they were excited about. And I became the student, and they were teaching me. And that was a very powerful life lesson for me as well. And so from them, I became a lifelong a pursuer and lover of manga. For me, my future, I recently just returned from Kenya and helping youth there to create comic books. And I will tell you that there are many youth in Nairobi who love manga. So manga is a worldwide experience and endeavor. And I think I will be trying to pursue the international connections, the things that connect us all over the world through manga, through comics, through art, and through literature, and to keep building those bridges amongst young learners and educators around the world.
Thank you. Bland, you are kind of a legend in the art education who started to research about the manga's influences. So I want to hear about
Well,
when, how.
when I saw my first doujinshi and I said, teenagers are creating these things, it looked like they were done by professional artists. And that's when I said, I've got to learn more about the kids, the teenagers who are creating these things. Then, as we visited with the doujinshi creators in comic markets, and both in Japan and in Taiwan, I would say to some of the older creators who were in their mid-20s, I said, "How long are you going to do this?" And they said, "As long as it gives me satisfaction." And I think as long as they were getting recognition from it. And you see, we educators sometimes think that what is important, we art educators, I should say, is what we do in the classroom. And I say, no, what is important is how we teach our students to live their entire life in the world of art. And living a life in manga and doujinshi is a life in art. And if I were Look, I'm going to be 91 in 3 weeks. So I am not, I'm not going to be tenured, and I don't need another publication. But if I did, what I would do is study I would want to see how many individuals who were the teenagers that I was studying, are they still creating manga? Ida in Taiwan she actually worked as for a creator of professional manga in Taiwan. They didn't help. It was unsatisfying. She went back to creating her own doujinshi, and she was creating a trilogy having to do with psychology. And as I said, she was approaching 30. Is she still working? I mean, I am fascinated by how people live their lives in art in so many ways. On Instagram, I follow people who have a project that they keep working on. And that's what I would study. Are, are there 40 and 50-year-olds who are still creating doujinshi?
True, that's true. Yeah. Okay, just let me introduce my new book, Women's Voices in Manga. I just published with Hiromi Doraj, Basa College. So I'm also not completely retired, but semi-retired. So I have a little bit time. So I didn't want to more organizing about the symposia to talking about the gender issue or manga general by inviting many different areas, not just has to be art education, not just manga research group, not just about like a literature. So it's nice to see because many people started to use manga anime into their own teaching and the curriculum. So it's time to meet, talk, each other, go beyond their area that we can get a new idea. They really wanted to continue to create a great lesson for the children. This is my future plan, my retirement plan.
That sounds great.
Thank you, Brad.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Emily. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sakuya. I
It's
truly
been
appreciate
great
you.
to be with all of you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. So that's all for today. I hope this episode could provide you some like a vision or like some ideas of how to use manga and anime for education. And I'd like to extend a big thank you to our special guest speakers, Michael, Brent, Emery, and Masami for sharing their expertise. For the free manga resources, please check our online library that you can find a link in the description box. And also don't forget to subscribe to our channels as we will be exploring the role of manga in your education again from the perspectives of librarians in a future episode. So lastly, before you go, please fill out a quick survey and then let us know what topics you like to see covered in a future episode. The survey link is also in the description box too. So thank you again for joining us today. We hope to see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.